"You're too much of a perfectionist for construction," Garrett said, tossing the concrete specs on my desk like yesterday's newspaper. "My name's Roland Hayes. I'm 51, been pouring foundations in Tulsa for 23 years. Started as a laborer fresh out of high school, worked my way up to foreman at Summit Builders. I've built hospitals, apartment complexes, and more schools than I can count. Never had a single structure fail inspection. Never had a kid get hurt because I cut corners." The specs Garrett dropped showed a concrete mix that didn't match our original bid. The PSI rating was 30% lower than what we promised the school district. Lower than what the blueprints called for. Lower than what those kids deserved. "This supplier is cheaper," Garrett continued, leaning against the trailer wall. "We save 50 grand on materials alone. Corporate loves efficiency." I picked up the papers and read them again. The new concrete wouldn't hold up to the load requirements for a 2-story elementary school. Not safely. Maybe it'd last 5 years before stress fractures appeared. Maybe 10 if they got lucky. "This doesn't meet code," I said, keeping my voice level. Garrett's eyes narrowed. "Roland, we've been through this before. You worry too much about every little detail. Real builders know how to maximize profits while getting the job done." I set the specs down and looked at him. Garrett had been my supervisor for 3 years. Before that, he worked sales at corporate headquarters in Oklahoma City. Never poured concrete in his life. Never had to explain to a parent why their child's school collapsed. "This isn't a little detail," I said. "It's a foundation for a school." "It's a foundation that needs to be cost-effective," he shot back. "The school district doesn't need to know every technical specification. They just need a building that looks good and passes basic inspection." Something cold settled in my stomach. I'd suspected this conversation was coming for months. Garrett had been pushing cheaper materials, faster timelines, and what he called creative solutions. The other foremen went along with it. They had mortgages and families to think about. So did I. But I also had something else, a conscience. "I need to review this with the engineering team," I said, stalling for time. Garrett straightened up. "There's nothing to review. Corporate already approved it. We start pouring Monday morning. That's final." After he left, I sat in my truck for 20 minutes, staring at those specs. I thought about the kids who'd walk those hallways. Thought about my own daughter, Abigail, who attended a school I'd helped build 8 years ago. Thought about how I'd sleep at night knowing I poured a foundation designed to fail. That's when I made my first call. I started working construction because my dad, Martin, did. He taught me that a man's work speaks for itself long after he's gone. Martin built half the commercial district in downtown Tulsa during the 80s. Solid work, still standing strong. "Measure twice, cut once," he used to say. "And never let anyone pressure you into doing something you can't put your name on." He died of a heart attack when I was 34. By then, I'd already been promoted to crew leader. I promised myself I'd build structures the way he would have. No shortcuts. No regrets. My wife Meredith understood the pressure I was under. We'd been married 19 years, and she knew I brought work stress home sometimes, but she also knew I couldn't compromise on safety. "You do what you think is right," she told me that Friday night, as I explained the concrete situation. "We'll figure out the rest." Abigail, our 16-year-old, was doing homework at the kitchen table. She looked up when I mentioned the elementary school project. "That's where my friend Chloe's little brother goes," she said. "Isn't that the new school on Elmwood Avenue?" My chest tightened. I'd driven past that site every day for 2 months, watching the foundation prep work, thinking about all the children who depend on what we built there. The warning signs with Garrett had been building for months. It started small, switching to a cheaper grade of rebar on a strip mall project, using less waterproofing on a warehouse foundation. Each time I raised concerns. Each time, Garrett dismissed them. "You're not seeing the big picture, Roland," he'd say. "Construction is about meeting deadlines and budgets. Everything else is just paperwork. But the paperwork mattered. Building codes existed for reasons written in blood and tragedy. I'd studied every major structural failure in my career. The Regency Plaza walkway collapse in Indianapolis, the Sunrise State University. Bridge failure. They all started the same way. Someone decided good enough was actually good enough. 3 weeks earlier, I'd overheard Garrett on a phone call with corporate. He was bragging about cost savings on recent projects, talking about managing inspector relationships, using phrases like regulatory flexibility and value engineering. I'd seen the financial reports too. Summit Builders was struggling. 2 major contracts had fallen through the previous year. The company was bidding aggressively on every project, often below what the work actually cost. They were making up the difference by cutting material quality and pressuring crews to work faster. I understood the business pressure. What I couldn't understand was using children's safety as the solution. That weekend, I drove to the job site after hours, stood where the foundation would be poured, imagined classrooms full of kids above that concrete. Kids laughing, learning, growing up. They deserved better than Garrett's cost-saving measures. They deserved the foundation I'd originally promised to build. Monday morning arrived with the kind of Oklahoma heat that makes concrete cure too fast if you're not careful. I showed up early, hoping to have another conversation with Garrett, maybe find a compromise that'd satisfy corporate while meeting safety standards. Instead, I found the concrete trucks already lined up outside the site. The drivers were checking their manifests, preparing to pour the substandard mix ordered. I recognized the lead driver, Frank, who delivered quality concrete to my sites for 12 years. "Morning, Roland," Frank called out. "Got a change in specs here. This mix seems lighter than usual." I walked over and checked his delivery ticket. The concrete strength was exactly what Garrett had ordered, 30% below the original specification. Perfectly legal for a warehouse slab or parking lot. Completely inadequate for a school foundation. "Frank," I said quietly, "hold off on the pour until I clear something with the office." He nodded, sensing something was wrong. I found Garrett in the construction trailer, reviewing schedules with 2 junior supervisors. When he saw me, his expression hardened. "Roland, hope you're not here to restart yesterday's conversation." "I am," I said. "This concrete won't hold the load when the building settles. We'll have foundation cracks within 5 years, maybe sooner." The junior supervisors looked uncomfortable. One of them, Trevor, had worked under me for 6 years. He knew my reputation for quality work. Garrett stood up. "Roland, I'm going to say this one more time. Corporate has approved these specifications. The concrete meets minimum building code requirements. We are not spending an extra $50,000 to make you feel better about engineering margins." "It's not about margins," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It's about doing the job right." "The job," Garrett said, his voice rising, "is to build this school on time and on budget. Period. If you can't handle that level of responsibility, maybe you need to find another line of work." The trailer went quiet. Trevor and the other supervisors stared at their paperwork, pretending not to listen. I looked at Garrett for a long moment, thought about my 23 years with this company, thought about the reputation I'd built, thought about all the structures that still stood because I'd insisted on doing things right. Then I thought about those kids. "I won't pour substandard concrete under a school," I said. "Find someone else." Garrett's face flushed red. "You're fired. Pack your tools and get off my site." I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice, just nodded and walked out of the trailer. As I loaded my toolbox into my truck, I saw Trevor watching from the window. He looked like he wanted to say something but stayed put. I drove away from that job site knowing I'd made the right choice. What Garrett didn't know was that I'd already made 3 phone calls over the weekend. The real work was just beginning. That afternoon, I called Meredith from my truck outside a coffee shop on Heritage Boulevard. "How did it go?" she asked. "I'm unemployed," I said. Silence on the other end. Then, "Good. You couldn't live with yourself if you'd backed down." She was right. But being right doesn't pay the mortgage. I spent the rest of the week making calls to other construction companies in the Tulsa area. My reputation opened doors, but the conversations all ended the same way. Everyone knew I'd been fired from Summit Builders. In construction, word travels fast. "Roland, you're a solid foreman," said Jacob Miller, owner of Miller & Sons Construction. "But I can't afford to hire someone who won't follow orders from management. This is a business, not a safety seminar." Another company manager was more direct. "Look, we all know Garrett Vance. He's got friends at the licensing board. Nobody wants trouble with Summit Builders. Maybe try looking outside Oklahoma." By Friday, I realized I was being blacklisted. Garrett had made calls, spread the word that I was difficult to manage, and inflexible about cost controls. In a tight industry where everyone knew everyone, that was a career death sentence. But I had something Garrett didn't expect: documentation. Over the weekend, I compiled everything I'd gathered during the 3 weeks before my firing. Emails showing the concrete specification changes, purchase orders revealing the cost-cutting measures, photos of the original blueprints compared to the modified plans, text messages between Garrett and the concrete supplier discussing flexibility in mix requirements. I also had something else: video footage. The previous month, I'd started recording safety meetings and material deliveries with my phone, standard practice for protecting yourself against liability claims. What I'd captured was Garrett explicitly instructing crews to work around certain building code requirements and discussing how to manage inspector visits. Monday morning, I drove to the Tulsa Building Inspection Office on South Peoria Avenue. The chief inspector, Diane Reynolds, had worked with me on dozens of projects over the years. She knew my reputation for thorough, compliant work. "Roland," she said, looking surprised when I walked into her office. "Heard about the situation at Summit. I'm sorry." "Diane," I said, setting a thick folder on her desk. "I need to file a formal structural deviation report." Her expression grew serious. "What kind of deviation?" I opened the folder and showed her the concrete specifications, explained the load calculations, walked her through the emails and purchase orders. Diane studied the documents for 20 minutes, occasionally asking technical questions. Her frown deepened as she reviewed the evidence. "Roland, this is substantial," she said finally. "If what you're showing me is accurate, this represents a significant safety violation." "It's accurate," I said. "Every document is dated and verified." She leaned back in her chair. "You understand that filing this report will trigger a formal investigation. We'll have to shut down the project pending review." "I understand." "You also understand that Summit Builders will know you filed the complaint." I nodded. "I'm prepared for that." Diane picked up her phone. "I'm calling the site inspector right now. We'll have someone there within the hour." As I left the building inspection office, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Stay out of business that doesn't concern you anymore. Some bridges can't be rebuilt." GV Garrett was playing hardball, but he'd made one critical mistake. He thought I was fighting for my job. I wasn't. I was fighting for those kids' lives, and I'd already taken steps he couldn't undo. That evening, I received a call from Meredith. Her voice was tight with worry. "Roland, Abigail came home from school today asking questions. Some of her friends' parents work in construction. They're saying you're causing problems for hardworking people, that you're trying to shut down a school project. The smear campaign had started. Garrett wasn't just trying to blacklist me professionally. He was going after my family's reputation in the community. I sat in my truck outside our house, looking at the windows where my wife and daughter were probably discussing whether their husband and father was doing the right thing. For the first time since this whole situation started, I wondered if I'd made a mistake. Then I remembered those concrete specs, and I knew I hadn't. The building inspector arrived at the Summit Builders site Tuesday morning at 8:00 a.m. sharp. I wasn't there to see it, but Trevor called me an hour later. "Roland, you need to know what happened," he said, his voice shaky. The inspector showed up with a stack of papers and shut everything down. Garrett went ballistic, started yelling about former employees causing trouble. The inspector told him to call his lawyer. "What about the concrete?" I asked. "They took samples from the trucks that were already on site, sent them to a lab for testing. Also took core samples from the warehouse foundation we poured last month, the one using the same supplier." That warehouse foundation. I'd raised concerns about that project too, but Garrett had overruled me. If those core samples showed structural deficiencies, it'd prove this wasn't an isolated incident. "Trevor," I said, "what aren't you telling me?" Long pause. "Roland, there's something else." The inspector asked questions about other recent projects. She had a list of sites where we used the same concrete supplier. This isn't just about the school anymore. My stomach dropped. If Diane Reynolds was investigating multiple sites, it meant she'd found a pattern of systematic code violations. This was bigger than one substandard foundation. Did she mention any specific projects? The Riverside Medical Center parking structure, the Westside Elementary addition from last year, the Morrison Community Center. "Roland, we've been using that cheap concrete supplier on a lot of jobs." I thought about all those structures, all those people depending on foundations that might not hold up under stress. The medical center parking structure alone served thousands of patients and families every year. That afternoon, I received an unexpected call from someone I hadn't spoken to in 2 years, Marcus Thompson, a structural engineer who'd worked on several of my projects before moving to a consulting firm in Austin, Roland asked. "Roland, I heard about the situation in Tulsa," Marcus said. "I've been doing some research on concrete failures in Oklahoma. Your timing might be perfect." "What do you mean?" 3 weeks ago, I was hired by an insurance company to investigate foundation problems at a commercial building in Norman. Guess who the contractor was? Summit Builders. Bingo. And guess which concrete supplier they used? The same one Garrett had been pushing for the school project. Marcus continued. "The building owners are filing a lawsuit. Foundation cracks appeared 18 months after construction. The concrete's actual strength is about 60% of what's listed on the delivery tickets." 60%? Roland? "I think your former company has been systematically using substandard materials and falsifying documentation. This could be criminal fraud, not just code violations." That evening, I drove to the Elmwood Avenue school site. The gates were locked, yellow caution tape wrapped around the perimeter. A city sign read, "Construction halted pending safety investigation." I sat in my truck across the street, watching the empty lot where those children's classrooms should have been rising. My phone rang. Meredith. "Roland, you need to come home. There's a man here who says he's a reporter from the Tulsa Tribune. He's asking questions about the school project." The story was going public. When I got home, the reporter sat at our kitchen table with Meredith and Abigail. He was young, maybe late 20s, with the eager expression of someone who smelled a big story. "Mr. Hayes," he said, standing to shake my hand. "I'm Ethan Shaw from the Tribune. I understand you filed the complaint that shut down the Elmwood Elementary project. I filed a safety report with the building inspection office, I said carefully. Sources tell me this involves allegations of widespread use of substandard building materials. Can you comment? I looked at Meredith, then Abigail. My daughter watched me with pride and worry. Those kids deserve a safe school, I said finally. That's all I'm trying to ensure. The reporter smiled. Mr. Hayes, I think you'll want to hear what else I've discovered about Summit Builders. Ethan Shaw opened his laptop and pulled up a spreadsheet with dozens of entries. I've been investigating construction irregularities in Oklahoma for 6 months. Your complaint gave me the missing piece. The spreadsheet showed a pattern. Projects where Summit Builders faced complaints about foundation problems, structural issues, or premature deterioration. 23 buildings, over 4 years. All used the same concrete supplier Garrett pushed for the school. The Morrison Community Center developed foundation cracks after 8 months, Shaw continued. The Riverside Medical Center parking structure has water infiltration problems that shouldn't exist with proper concrete. 3 apartment complexes have structural issues their builders called normal settling. Abigail leaned forward, studying the screen. Dad, how many people could get hurt if these buildings have problems? Thousands, I said quietly. Shaw nodded. That's why this story matters. But I need more than allegations. I need proof of systematic fraud. What kind of proof? Internal communications, financial records, testimony from workers who witnessed material substitutions. I thought about Trevor and the crew who'd seen everything but stayed quiet to protect their jobs. Good men with families, afraid to speak up. I might be able to help with that, I said. The next morning I made calls, first to Trevor. We met at a diner off Route 66. He looked exhausted. Roland, they've got us working 16-hour days trying to get back on schedule, he said. Garrett's furious about the investigation. He's blaming everything on you. Trevor, how many guys on the crew have documentation? Texts? Emails? Photos? He shifted uncomfortably. Most of us. We document everything to cover ourselves if something goes wrong. But Roland, if we turn that over, we'll all get fired. If you don't, people could get hurt, maybe killed. Trevor stared into his coffee. What are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to do the right thing, like I did. That afternoon, Trevor called back. There are 6 guys willing to provide documentation, but we need guarantees. Protection from retaliation. I connected him with Ethan Shaw, who linked him to a whistleblower attorney. Then another call. Mr. Hayes, Attorney Daniel Pierce from Pearson Holt. I represent property owners with structural issues in buildings Summit Builders constructed. I'd like to discuss your expert testimony. Expert testimony? My 23 years suddenly had legal value. How many cases? I asked. Potentially dozens. Your documentation could establish a pattern of negligent construction practices. That weekend, Diane Reynolds called with concrete test results. Roland, samples from the school site tested 42% below. Specified strength, core samples from the warehouse foundation. Worse, structural failure could occur in 2-3 years under normal loads. What happens now? Full investigation, criminal referral to the DA's office. And Roland? The school district wants to meet about you taking over the project with a new contractor. Meredith cooked dinner as I hung up. Abigail sat at the table where Ethan Shaw first revealed Summit's scale. Dad? Abigail looked up from her textbook. My friend Chloe asked if our house is safe. Her parents heard you built part of their neighborhood. I smiled. Tell Chloe's parents her house was built before. Garrett Vance started cutting corners. It'll stand 100 years. Abigail grinned. So we're the good guys? We're the ones who tell the truth, I said. Sometimes that's the same thing. The Tulsa Tribune ran Ethan Shaw's investigation as a front-page series. Foundation of Lies: How an Oklahoma builder put profits before safety. By noon, the state attorney general announced a criminal probe into Summit Builders for fraud and endangering public safety. By 3 p.m., Summit's stock dropped 37%. By 5 p.m., Garrett Vance was escorted from his office by federal agents carrying evidence boxes. I was reviewing testimony at Pierce and Holt when the alert hit my phone. Attorney Daniel Pierce looked up. How does it feel to see justice in action, like those kids will finally get the school they deserve? I said. The charges piled up. Wire fraud, falsifying concrete specs, conspiracy, systematic material substitutions, endangering public welfare, compromising structural integrity. Civil litigation followed. 28 property owners sued for damages. Insurance companies joined, demanding reimbursement. Trevor and 5 crew members provided evidence that sealed the case. Hundreds of texts discussing creative substitutions, emails detailing cost-saving schemes, financial records showing kickbacks from the concrete supplier. 3 months later, I watched Garrett Vance sentenced to 4 years in prison. Full restitution. The judge's words lingered. Construction professionals hold a sacred trust to build structures that protect people. You violated that trust for profit. Outside the courthouse, Ethan Shaw waited with a camera crew. Mr. Hayes, any comment? I thought of the job loss, legal battles, and threats from Garrett's supporters. The nights Meredith and I wondered if we'd done right. Those kids are getting a safe school, I said. That's all that matters. Spring arrived early in Tulsa. I stood on Elmwood Elementary's freshly poured foundation, checking concrete strength reports. Perfect specs, premium materials. Everything those children deserved. The district hired Carson and Associates to finish the project. They'd asked me to be senior foreman, an offer that restored faith in the industry. "Roland, the principal wants a walkthrough," shouted Lisa Hendricks, my new project manager. She understood safety and quality weren't optional. As we toured the site, I reflected. Losing my job revealed my purpose. Standing firm created opportunities I'd never imagined. Meredith and Abigail visited that afternoon. Abigail brought her camera for a school project titled Local Heroes. "Dad, Chloe's little brother will attend this school," she said, photographing the foundation. "He's excited." "Tell him his school will last forever," I said. That evening, I drove home through neighborhoods I'd built over 23 years. Houses, stores, offices standing solid because they were built right. My phone buzzed. Trevor, now at a reputable firm in Oklahoma City. "Saw the news about Elmwood's opening. Proud to have worked with you, Roland." I pulled into my driveway, studying the home Meredith and I built. Good foundation, solid walls, a place where truth outweighed convenience. Sometimes doing the right thing costs everything. Sometimes it gives you everything back.